Welcome to the Bleep Bulimia podcast with guest Elena Perella, personal coach, domestic violence, and eating disorders advocate. Hi, everyone. I am Lorianne. I'm the host of Bleep Bulimia. And today I am so pleased to have Elena Perella, and she is a personal coach, domestic violence, and eating disorders advocate. So happy to have you on. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I'll start off with my regular question. What led you to become, the personal coach and get into the domestic violence and the eating disorder aspect and being an advocate?
First of all, it's human behavior is a passion of mine since I was a child, actually. And with the experiences later, the experiences that I went through, it was clear to me that I had to, and I wanted to follow this path. Yeah.
And can you share with us some of the experience you went through that led you here?
Yes, I went through the domestic violence, eating disorders. So when I was 12, I began to manifest what I call my family's toxic emotional inheritance, which is the root cause of our behavior, our unhealthy behaviors. And in my case, the manifestations were eating disorders, for example. And I began to suffer from the binge eating when I was 12 until I became 19. Then my binge eating became turned into bulimia nervosa.
Yeah. That's difficult. So basically that whole emotional, what we do say, emotional eating and such. And so that led you on to, so you're 19. How long did you struggle with your bulimia?
With the binge eating, 7 years, and with bulimia, 16.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a long time. And I coached myself through my eating disorders.
Okay. And that's led you now that you're helping other people to also go through that. Seeing as you coaching yourself, you had, obviously, you understood what was required.
Yes,
recover.
I understood that, but I don't specifically coach people who suffer from eating disorders,
okay,
because I'm not specialized in that, unless they are ready.
Okay.
They are ready to be supported by me. Otherwise, usually people who suffer from eating disorders look for a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist. Yeah.
So the domestic violence that was in your childhood, I would imagine, would be your parents?
No,
or no?
no.
Well, tell us, please.
In my childhood too, because my mother didn't want to have children, so and it began there in her womb, actually, with a rejection for me, and she neglected me and emotionally, and rejected me emotionally. My father too. He wanted to have children, but he didn't have time for that, and so they both nurtured me, but they didn't love me, which means they didn't supported me in growing and evolving, and put many obstacles on my path. They pass also on to me a family's toxic emotional inheritance, which is a toxic baggage of emotions, thoughts, beliefs, tendencies, unresolved childhood issues, inner conflicts that was passed on to us by our parents. It's a generational thing that we inherit. We inherit also beautiful traits from our parents and family, that's for sure, but unfortunately, many of us inherit also this toxic, destructive part. And so I grew up in an environment that was quite toxic because there was no communication. I couldn't express myself emotionally. My mother feared my father. My father was totally immersed in his job. So he never created a relationship with me. And this hurt a lot. No? It causes emotional wounds.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes. Yeah.
So you had siblings as well, and were did they go through the same thing as well?
Through the same thing, but manifesting it in different ways. Yeah.
It's interesting. And we really don't think about, we talk about genetics generally medically. We talk about, what we get from our parents, but it's interesting to hear that. I guess it would come down into the genetics, also the mindset and how you know deal with certain things. uh, you tend to find too, like I have three siblings as well, and each one of us has a little portion of maybe more towards the maternal or maybe more towards the paternal, which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it is true. We inherit a lot of the emotional, and if this is toxic, then we've got a problem because it affects our natural development, the natural development of our potential, and it compromises our psychological, emotional, and physical functioning. And so this is why at one point I developed eating disorders. I began to smoke. I was bullied at school because I was hurt inside. And my parents fueled their family's toxic emotional inheritance with their unhealthy parenting.
Now, I know that when I was reading your bio, you mentioned overachievers. I know that a lot of people who struggle with eating disorders are overachievers as well, perfectionists, people pleasers. I mean, there's categories that seem to emerge, the characteristics seem to emerge from that. Were you any of those?
Oh, yes, I pushed myself to the extreme. I was a perfectionist, and I inherited this tendency from my mother, for example. Yeah, and I always wanted to achieve more, more and more. And on the one hand, this is good because if you're ambitious and determined to achieve a high level in your life, that's perfect. It's wonderful. But you have also to understand your own how to do it at your own pace. Because if you are like I was, full of these toxic emotions and pain, then uh, then you go beyond, and you don't enjoy the process, although you do things that you really like and love, because you feel this anxiety that is pushing you to reach perfection. While if you don't have this toxic inheritance, you will still be a high achiever, but you will do it at your own pace, enjoying the process, and loving what you do without so much pressure that costs you um, your health, because then your health gets compromised.
Absolutely. Now, I know that I would like to know more about your personal coaching, but first, before I start with that, I'm sure my listeners would like to know if you can share a little bit about your recovery and how. I know there's no specific way, but what would you say is an important thing that you learned to help you recover?
Yes, what I did, actually, it happened this way. When my father died, I was 19 years old. I awoke. I opened my eyes and I began to see things for what they really are. And it was then that my journey towards my internal renewal began. Because it was then when I understood that I was a toxic product of my family, and that my problems were not my choice, because we are not so stupid to choose to hurt ourselves. Self-sabotage does not exist. We are forced by those toxic elements. They are stronger than we are. This is why it is so difficult to change, because we have something inside that pushes us to behave in certain ways that are not healthy, unwanted behaviors that we really don't like, but that we display because we cannot do anything different. And so I understood that, and I began to become aware of all those toxic elements that I inherited from my parents. And I began to heal myself doing self-reflection. So first, understanding all this, what I'm telling, that I was this toxic product of my family. And I began also at the same time to observe myself, to understand my behaviors. And I began to ask myself, okay, is this me, or is this a behavior that belongs to my mother. And so every time I looked at what I was doing and asked myself, okay, it's mine or not? And when the answer was, okay, no, it's my mother, it's a tendency that she has, okay, I want to eliminate it. And what I did was, for example, challenging myself. The thing that my mother was afraid to do was to drive the car. And she passed that on to me. So I took my driver license very late because of that fear that I inherited. And then I thought, okay, I still have this fear. It's not mine. So what I can do is drive, take lessons, and pass the exams and learn to drive. So I did it. It was quite scary for me, but it was because of my inherited fear. It wasn't my own fear.
Yeah.
And so I challenged it, and little by little, I eliminated it. And once it faded away, I felt confident. I thought, okay, yeah, actually, I like driving the car.
That's interesting. Me personally, both my parents liked to drive. My mother not so much, but my dad taught her how to drive, and dad loved to drive. And I was so excited to get my license when I did. So no fear there because my parents never showed any fear. But I would imagine too, some of it, the inherence is watching and observing your parents and taking that on. Like my mother had, I think she still does, fear of heights. And I became aware of her fears. Then I became oversensitive to heights. And then I think it's not so much that it was in me, but that it was learned from watching my mother and her behavior. So I learned it to be afraid. And now I still don't like heights too much. I don't think that I'm alone on that one, but I can get up on a ladder without as much fear as I used to. And, you know, my daughter and I went up on her roof once together just for fun. And,
Right.
and it was good. It was overcoming that. But I think that some of the behaviors too are not so much even that we're born with, but the observation of our parents that we take it on, right?
That's also, yeah, that plays also a role, yes, because we learn from our parents. Yeah.
For sure.
So I inherited so much from them that
Yeah,
little by little I eliminated everything. And
that's
finally, it was the bulimia that left me. When I eliminated the last toxic element, it was gone.
I love how you say that. It was the bulimia that left me.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's almost like bulimia. I know that some people might think it's weird to say this, but I used to say it's a very toxic friend. Because it was a friend, but it was a toxic friend. A friend in the sense that it numbed you, it, you know, gave you some pleasure, but then disgust and all that stuff together. So it was like a toxic friend, and I was pretty happy to let it go. And the same thing, though, what you're saying is toxic people in your life. Once you start eliminating them, you know, that really does help in the recovery process. And eventually your bulimia will leave because you've eliminated toxic people. Well, that person's got that thing's got to go too, right? So that's
Yes,
very interesting. I love
it
it.
helps, but you have to make sure that you eliminate what you inherited and absorbed from those toxic people.
Yeah.
Because if I know many people that left their family, for example, like I did, but they never did internal work, and they became older with that toxic baggage,
Yeah.
and it didn't them any good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can't run away from it. I know that I tried to do that and it just made things worse, and, you know, my family and everything. So I remember somebody saying, oh, you know, I feel deserted. I'm just going to run away. And I said, it's the worst possible thing you can do. Trust me, been there, done that. Don't you? And you're taking yourself with you anyway, unless you, like you said, eliminate those elements. It's coming with you.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you become awake, and become aware, then you can start to make your own choices.
That's beautiful.
But otherwise, yeah. And another thing that I did that helped me a lot, I reparented myself.
Oh,
Yeah.
So what would be if you can give us an example of how you would
Yes,
do that?
I simply thought of what I needed from my parents when I was a child and that I didn't receive. And so I began to give it to myself. For example, encouragement. They never encouraged me to do things, to not give up, and I did it, and that helped a lot because I became my own father and my own mother, guiding myself through life as I was a little child that was growing from the inside.
That's lovely. I hadn't heard that before. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And to that, I believe that this is going to be something very valuable to our listeners. Wanted to speak a little bit too about what you do. You're a personal coach. What do you primarily coach? Like, what's your expertise?
My expertise is to identify and help people eliminate their family's toxic emotional inheritance and societal toxic conditionings. Yeah. I take a very intuitive approach, which means that once we start having conversations, I can see what the obstacles are, what elements are in the client that I am supporting, and I identify those elements for them and help them become aware of those, and transformation and especially evolution happens. Yeah.
That can't be too easy for, I would imagine, people, first of all, recognizing them. So it's nice as a personal coach that you can help them do that. But something that's ingrained, that toxicity, must be difficult to remove, because I would imagine sometimes it's, let's say it's anger towards another person, hard to forgive the other person that's toxic. Those are not easy to resolve.
Well, actually, it's less difficult.
Oh, I
For
like
me, it was difficult and long. It took a long time because I did it myself, so I had to figure it out. But eventually, I understood that it can be done very easily and faster than we imagine. Yes, because what I noticed with my clients is that through our conversations, the process starts. And because the person feels at peace and free to be, and it's as if those elements come to the surface, and often they can fade away very quickly.
Well, that's nice to hear, because I would have thought
Yes.
that, because some people hold that in for like years and years, and I would imagine once they've had it for years, it would be harder, like it'd be a longer process to remove it. But it's nice to hear that you know, they said it's not necessarily, that it can go quickly, and
Yeah,
that's
it can
very
go,
encouraging.
yes, it can go faster. And it's also what I help them start is a beginning. Of course, it will take um, a little, how can I say, after they start with me, I give them, it's as if you buy a car and I hand you the keys, you know? So I will tell you how to continue by yourself. And I will help you also learn how to do it without going through the passage of self-demolition, because I went through that passage and it's not nice, you know, and it's also not necessary.
Yeah.
It's not necessary. So this is what I teach to my clients, that that's not necessary. I tell them how to do it, and then they can do it by themselves after the program.
That's beautiful. Do you find though that your clients sometimes, even if they've gotten to that point where they can do it on their own, but they still would like you there? I mean, I guess for like accountability or follow-ups, I would think, as I know me personally, I went through therapy quite late after I recovered, but it was more for my anxiety. But the interesting fact, though, did 12 weeks, felt wonderful, did great for another 3 months. And then after those 3 months, I felt a little bit dwindling again. So I was wondering, do you find that with your clients that they do like to, maintain, whether it's like once every 2 weeks or once a month, to meet with you just to keep that constant?
Yes,
Or
absolutely.
they
Yeah,
do, right? Yeah.
sometimes they want to have uh, an interaction once or twice a month after the program. Um, I had a client who wanted to stay longer because she wanted to achieve more, so she stayed a year. But she had really a lot to do. Yeah, she had to separate from an abusive husband. She had to reorganize her family because she has 3 children. She had to quit smoking. She had to find a job. So we did everything in a year. And I have now, for example, one of my clients is an adolescent, and she's responding very fast, actually, because she wasn't going to school anymore. She stopped because she's quite depressed. She doesn't see any reason why she should, for example, start her day, and she was sleeping because now it's
Oh,
almost all day, and now we have seen each other, I mean, I think 13 weeks. Yes, 13 weeks. And well, she's now going to school again, so I'm very happy for her. She's trying to leave her mobile not take it when she goes to bed, for example, not taking it with her. And she's smiling again. So, she's getting started
that's
to get a
lovely.
life, to have a life. Yes, yeah, yeah.
That sounds a little bit like, I think there's a lot of people who could relate to that, like not wanting to get about. After my divorce, I had, and that's great for a year. I mean, thinking back on it, I wish I knew you 20 years ago, but but it took me a long time and more than a year. But the first year in particular was the toughest. I didn't want to get out of bed. Thank God I had my daughter there, because she gave me purpose too. But otherwise, I probably, I'd get her to school sometimes and jump right back in bed again. Didn't have, yeah, it was really, really tough. And I didn't seek out help, which I should have at the time. But, you think, oh no, I'm strong enough to get through this. And again, I really highly recommend. And I do to my listeners, if you're struggling with bulimia, you don't have to go to get help saying, I need someone to help me with my bulimia, because most of the time it's something else that you need help with. That, like you said, the bulimia will leave you once you get through that. So, I coach, and I call myself a bulimia recovery coach. However, that's a misnomer on that. And that's why I would like this show, because it gives people different opportunities to go different, to reach out for help with different people. Sometimes it is nice, though, even when you're coaching about the toxicity and removal of it, the fact that you went through an eating disorder, though, you're working on the other thing, but you have an understanding of what that person's going through a little more than somebody who hasn't gone through it. So, and I really appreciate that. So with I was just gonna say, your program then is not a specific like 12-week program, 3 months. You just
It's a
work.
6 month.
It
It's a
is 6 months.
month. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. And just, can you let our listeners know where can they find you? And is there anything else you want to talk about your business? Please let them know, because I want them to be able to reach out to you. And
Yes, I have a website. It's sentido.com.
did you want to? Well, I know that it's going to be in the notes, but for people who are listening, do you want to spell that out for us?
Of course, it's so sentidu.com.
Okay, perfect. And so all the information is there, and they can reach out to you there as well.
Yes.
Perfect. So 6-month program.
And all people who want to they have to be high achievers, very motivated, because I do not motivate people. They have to come already willing to do something to solve their problems. They have to be open to talk about family, because for many people it's difficult. I understand it, but family is where we are made.
Yeah.
And if um, our parents and relatives don't function properly, then it can affect our development.
Definitely.
And we need to talk about family in certain ways so that we eradicate old and not useful tendencies and ways, keep the new, the better, the fruitful that they give to us, and move on. And for all, uncover who we really are. Because once you eliminate your family's toxic emotional inheritance, then you really discover your real essence.
I love it. Thank you again so much for being a guest here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me here.
Take care. You have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit me at bleepbulimia.com.